So today we're going to be delving into the mysterious world of Falernum. We're going to be talking about its history, uncovering its recipes, and doing a comparison of the 4 most popular versions out there today. So, let's do this. Now the history of Falernum is as hazy as some of its formulas. It could or could not be a liqueur. It might be clear, or it might be cloudy. It could contain almonds, ginger, and/or cloves. What we do know for certain is that it's made from rum, contains lime and sugar, and was born on Barbados. It's actually believed that Falernum dates all the way back to the 1700s, where it was most likely just a traditional punch made of rum, lime, and sugar. Now, as tradition calls, most punches needed some spice, and so what would happen is each individual estate would add their own specific spices, and so you would have Falernum recipes that were different estate to estate. The earliest mention we see of Falernum in print is in 1852, in Charles William Day's 5 years residence in the West Indies. Day writes, "Wine is not drunk at our table, but cold brandy and water, or sometimes a sort of cold rum punch called Falernum, a very baneful, heady, bilious drink in great request." Now you'll notice that in this print, the spelling is a little bit different, but honestly that kind of makes sense, and I'll get to that point in a little bit when we start talking about where the name came from. We come across Falernum early on in print another time, but this time it's by the great Charles Dickens. In his 1892 novel All the Year Around, Dickens writes, "In spirituous drinks, the one most relished in Barbados is the bitter, of which there are 2 distinct varieties. The proper basis of both is Falernum, a curious liqueur composed from rum and lime juice. To a very varying quantity of this is added a proportion of extract of wormwood for the green bitter and of Angostura for the red, also water to taste." Now this passage does shed some light on the fact that it probably was just a simple rum punch, very much like the tea punch from Martinique. However, it does raise a few more questions. What is this green Falernum with wormwood and this red Falernum with Angostura? But I think that's honestly a topic for true historians and outside the scope of this video. Now where did the name come from? Well, there's a few different stories here and it's pretty hazy, much like the actual history itself. Some think it comes from the ancient Roman wine, Falernium. Others have a more colorful story. So essentially, when on the island of Barbados, a stranger would be handed this glass of rum punch. And when asked, well, what am I drinking? The natives would reply, Falernum, which probably sounds a lot better in a Barbados accent, which I'm just not going to try to do because I would butcher it. But essentially, it meant you have to learn it. And so that's possibly where the name came from. So let's take a look at the 4 Falernums we're going to take a look at today. First up is the John D. Taylor Falernum. From there, we're going to move into the Bitter Truth Company's Golden Falernum. Then we're going to take a look at Falernum number 9. Well, actually this is Falernum number 10, but we'll get there. And the new kid on the block, the Falernum out of the New Tropical Standard book by Garrett Richard. So the first bottle we're going to take a look at today is the John D. Taylor Falernum. Now, many people consider this to be the gold standard of Falernum. Now, it's actually distilled on the island of Barbados and uses a sugarcane spirit as its base. And because of this, many people consider this to be the only authentic Falernum we can get nowadays, and probably the closest that they used to use in the old days, like Don and Vic, the Falernum that they used to use. Now this was originally created in 1890 by John Taylor of Bridgetown, Barbados, and it clocks in about 11% ABV. We're not 100% on the sugar content. If anyone's done a Brix test on it, definitely drop a comment below. I'd love to hear if I'm close or not. I'm going to guess it's north of 350 grams per liter. It's pretty sweet. Let's give it a try. So on the nose, I'm getting a lot of almond and a little bit of lime. On the palate, it is thick, syrupy, very, very sweet, and a lot of clove. Here we have the Bitter Truth Company's Golden Falernum. Now the first thing to note is the color. It's got this rich golden color that we don't see in the Velvet Falernum. Now this Falernum clocks in at 18% ABV, so it's a decent amount higher than the John D. Taylor. Now according to the website, there is also added caramel coloring, which is probably part of where the color comes from. Other than that, we don't know much. So let's give it a try. On the nose, I'm getting a lot more citrus, so lime and also something else, possibly even orange. And that's kind of dominating the nose here. It kind of smells, you know what, it kind of smells like fruit punch, honestly. Let's give it a try. So that is a much less clove heavy, much more ginger forward, and much more citrus forward. Again, there's this fruit punch and ginger that's coming through. It's actually quite pleasant. Now we move on to our homemade Falernums. First up, we have Falernum number 9. Well, actually it's Falernum number 10, as I mentioned, but we'll get to that in a second. Falernum number 9 was created by Paul Clark, who is the host of the website Cocktail Chronicles, is a spirits writer and an editor for Imbibe. Now, legend has it that it took Paul 8 other attempts before knocking it out of the park with Falernum number 9. Now, why is Falernum number 9 by Paul Clark, this person that many of us don't know, so important and so popular? Well, that's because it's endorsed by Jeff the Beach Bum Berry. It's the Falernum that he appreciates the most, and it's the one he calls for in all of his classic cocktail recipes. Now, honestly, this was born out of necessity. In the early 2000s, Falernum was not commercially available, so in order to do it, Paul, well, had to make his own. Let's see what we'll need to make Falernum number 10. 6 ounces of Wray & Nephew, zest of 9 limes, 40 whole cloves, 1.5 ounces of grated ginger, 2 tablespoons of blanched and slivered almonds, and 14 ounces of cold-pressed rich simple syrup. Now there are 2 things to note here. The original Falernum number 9 recipe calls for adding the juice of the zested limes back into the syrup. I'm going to take that out, and a lot of people have started to take that out to increase shelf life. Now the other thing that you need to pay attention to is that Paul Clark specifically calls for a cold processed rich syrup because he likes the texture better against a heated one. So if you're going to do this according to the book, use a cold processed, simply just add sugar and water to a blending cup and just blend it. It blends up super fine. This Falernum is going to clock in at about 12.6% ABV, so slightly higher than the John D. Taylor, but not as hot as the Bitter Truth Company, and it has about 462 grams of sugar per liter, so it's definitely up there as far as the syrups and liqueurs are concerned, but it's like bordering on simple syrup level sugar. To make Falernum number 10, take the almonds, lime zest, and cloves and place them in an airtight container with the rum. Sous vide at 135 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours, or let it sit and steep and infuse for 24 hours. After the infusion is done, strain through a nut milk bag, making sure to squeeze and get all the liquid out. Now combine it with 14 ounces of cold pressed rich syrup, stirring to combine. Finally, pour into a sanitized bottle. Let's give it a taste. So on the nose, this one is much more almond forward and much more ginger forward. I'm not getting as much of the citrus that I got from the Bitter Truth Company, but yeah, let's give it a try. So that's probably the most pungent one so far. It's definitely very ginger forward. Excuse me, bit of a ginger burn on my back throat. And clove heavy. I'm missing the citrus that I really enjoyed in the Bitter Truth Company, and I'm missing the texture that I got out of the Velvet Falernum that I really enjoyed too. Now, let's talk about the new kid on the block, the Falernum out of the new Tropical Standard book by Garrett Richard. To make the Tropical Standard Falernum, you'll need 300 milliliters of gum syrup, 160 milliliters of cane syrup at a 66 Brix, 2.5 ounces or 75 milliliters of Wray & Nephew, half an ounce or 15 milliliters of Hamilton 151, 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of lime juice, quarter of an ounce or 7.5 milliliters of lemon juice, 17 grams of thinly sliced ginger, 8 grams of lime peels, 1 gram of cloves, 0.6 grams of grated nutmeg, 0.45 grams of mace, 0.45 grams of star anise, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of almond extract. Now after speaking with Garrett, I wanted to get the story behind why this Falernum and how it was created. So essentially, Garrett wanted to pay tribute to an old school Falernum that was popular during the golden age of Tiki, created by Sazerac. It was lower ABV and much more viscous. Now this pans out because this Falernum clocks in at 10% ABV, lowest out of all of them, and also half of it is gum syrup. So it's going to have a much more dense consistency than all the other ones. It also clocks in at about 462 grams of sugar per liter, so about the same level as the Falernum number 10. To make the Tropical Standard Falernum, combine all of the spices, cloves, nutmeg, mace, and star anise in a mortar and pestle or spice grinder. Grind into a powder. In a blender, combine the rums, ginger, and lime peels. Blend on high until the peels are finely diced. Combine the contents of the blender and the spice mixture in a Ziploc bag and sous vide at 125 degrees Fahrenheit for 12 hours or let sit and infuse for 24 hours. After the infusion time, strain through a nut milk bag into a container. Add the lime and lemon juice, almond extract, and cane syrup. This should yield about 300 milliliters of syrup. To this, add an equal amount, again about 300 milliliters of gum syrup, making sure to stir to combine. Then pour into a sanitized bottle. And then you have our Tropical Standard Falernum. Now, first off, I want to just say that this is not an extensive list of homemade Falernum recipes whatsoever. I just think these are probably the two most popular right now, so I wanted to showcase these. Secondly, for those of you following along in the book, the proportions I just gave are different than in the book because I wanted to scale mine down to about 600 milliliters. Also in the book, there is a typo. If you're following the directions in the book as is, it calls for 830 milliliters of gum syrup. That's incorrect. It should be about 485. Essentially, before you add the gum syrup, just take the final volume and then add equal amount. It's a typo that Garrett pointed out. And lastly, I did adjust my proportions ever so slightly just to make it a little bit easier to pour, but it's still the same. Anyway, let's give it a try. On the nose, it's much more ginger, I think, than any of them. And there's this, I want to call it like a silky smell, which doesn't really happen. Silk doesn't have a smell to it, but it smells not sweet. It smells thick. It's hard to describe. It's like, yeah, I can't really quite put my finger on it, but let's give it a try. So, obviously, with this thing being half gum syrup, the texture it's viscous, right? This thing is borderline like rich syrup viscous. It's delicious though, and the body that it's going to add to a cocktail is outstanding. The flavor is wonderful. It's slightly ginger forward. I'm getting the citrus that I'm getting from the Bitter Truth Company that I missed in the Falernum number 10, and there's a nice little like spice mixture on the back end. The thing about this Falernum is that there's more spices in it. It's not just clove, it's also mace and star anise. So that's adding depth and complexity to that spice note on the very back end. It's actually quite delicious. Okay, so as they stand by themselves, who do I think is the winner? Well, honestly, it's a tough call, but I'm probably gonna have to go with the Tropical Standard Falernum. It's really good. But let's be honest, most of us are not sipping Falernum neat. So let's try it in a cocktail. So the cocktail that we're going to be testing our Falernums in today is called the Hawaiian Eye. Now the Hawaiian Eye was created in 1963 by Tony Ramos of the China Trader in Burbank, California. Story has it that he created this cocktail for the crew of the Hawaiian Eye TV show that would come in and basically take over the bar after a long day of shooting. To make our Hawaiian Eye, we're going to need lightly aged rum, the star in question Falernum, simple syrup, and lime juice. Now, for those of you that are keen and following along at home, you may notice that my ingredients are slightly different than those found in the Total Tiki app. And that's because I want the Falernum to shine. Now, the original calls for a gold Puerto Rican rum and a lightly aged Hawaiian rum. I don't want either of those in this because I want the Falernum to shine. So instead, I'm subbing those out for just a nice calm still light rum from Shadow Ridge Distilling. So in order to combat dilution and give each of these a fair chance, I don't want one to be over diluted, I'm going to build these in the glass, add a little bit of ice, and then swizzle. Now, yes, by the time I get to the last one, there will be a little dilution, but I'm doing the best I can here. So let's make some Hawaiian Eyes and see how our Falernums do. Now again, I'm going to be building these in the glass. For those of you that are following along at home and just building a single cocktail, grab a shaking tin because you're going to build it in that. So in your glass, add 3/4 of an ounce or 22.5 milliliters of lime juice. Next, add 1/2 ounce or 15 milliliters of simple syrup. Now add 1/2 ounce or 15 milliliters of our Falernum. And lastly, 1.5 ounces or 45 milliliters of our lightly aged rum. Add some pebble ice to your glass. And shake, or in my case, swizzle for 5 to 8 seconds. So there you have it, our 4 Hawaiian Eyes with our 4 different Falernums. Let's give them a try. We'll start with the way that I introduced them, so we'll start with the John D. Taylor and go down from there. Alright, so it's okay. I'm getting a lot of lime from the lime juice. I'm getting the sweetness from the Falernum and the simple syrup. The light rum is not doing much, but that's fine. I don't want it to. I want the only thing in this thing to shine is the Falernum. And honestly, with the John D. Taylor, it's just falling flat. I'm not getting a ton. I'm getting maybe a little bit of clove on the back end. That's about it. Honestly, it's pretty one note. Let's try the Bitter Truth Company. So with the Bitter Truth Company one, I'm getting lime again, but I'm also getting another citrus, maybe orange, which I mentioned earlier in my tasting notes of the Falernum itself, so it makes sense. I'm getting less spice than I did with the John D. Taylor Falernum, and honestly, again, it's just not shining like I want it to. So, moving on, let's try the Falernum number 10. So, this is the punchiest one so far, which again makes sense, because in the standard tastings, this had the punchiest ginger flavor, and that is absolutely coming through now. There is a bit of almondness on the back end. I'm not getting much spice, so really it's lime from the lime juice, ginger from the Falernum, and a tiny bit of this almost like baked almond flavor on the back end, kind of like marzipan. It's not bad, it's also not great. It feels like competing flavors that just don't go together. It's leaving this weird thing in my mouth, and it's making me go, huh? It doesn't make sense. So I'm gonna move on to our last one, the Tropical Standard Falernum. First thing to note with the Tropical Standard Falernum is the texture. The body of the cocktail is just more dense. It's got more body to it. I don't know how else to put it. And that's coming from the gum syrup that is inside the Tropical Standard Falernum. Like, I expected that. But on the flavor profile, there's lime, which I expect from the lime juice and from the Falernum, but there's also a slight ginger note. And there's this wonderful spice mixture on the very back end that's still coming through. So it's like I'm getting the spice from the John D. Taylor. It's like I'm getting this lime and a little bit of citrus that I get from the Bitter Truth Company. And I get this spice note in ginger, but it's not overpowering like it is in the Falernum number 10. So, what does that mean? Well, if I had to declare a winner, again, based on this one single cocktail, listen, this is not an extensive test. I could have tested these in Jet Pilots and Cobra Fangs and Zombies and a myriad of other drinks, but I want to save my liver. So I picked a cocktail that was very, very simple, with very simple ingredients. I even simplified it even more to allow the Falernum to shine, because I wanted to see how it did competing with other flavors. Where does that leave us? Honestly, if I had to pick a winner, if you were like, Andy, which one do you like the best? It's gonna be the Tropical Standard Falernum. Like, I liked it the best in itself neat, and I'm honestly just gonna say I like it the best in a cocktail. It has the most well-rounded flavors that pairs well with the cocktail that I had. Now that may change if we were to change the cocktail, but it does not compete with other things. Like, this one competed with flavors. These two just didn't show up. They were like, nah, we're not coming to the party. This one, on the other hand, shows up, but it plays along nicely. So, and it adds texture to a cocktail, unlike these three. They just didn't do it. But honestly, this does require a bit of work. It's multi-steps. And it's not shelf stable. At 10% ABV and only 462 grams of sugar per liter, it will mold. So you do have to use it quickly. So it's a lot of work for something that you really should use within 2 weeks. And I scaled down the recipe. The numbers I gave you produces 600 milliliters. That's a lot of Falernum to go through in 2 weeks. Could you scale it down even more? Sure. But at that point, you're working with minuscule grams of star anise. Is it even worth it at that point? I don't know. That begs the question. Maybe I should make my own Falernum recipe. If you guys think that that would be something you'd be interested in, maybe taking the key components of all 4 of these and blending them into one super Falernum that would be shelf stable, that you can make at home, that would be relatively easy, listen, I am all for it. Just let me know and then drop a comment below and I will do it, because I'm probably going to do it anyway. But if you guys want to see that recipe, definitely let me know. So that's it for our deep dive into the world of Falernum. We talked about its history and we looked at 4 different versions. And for me, the winner happens to be the Tropical Standard, but your mileage may vary. So if you choose to do this tasting on your own, I'd love to hear your feedback and what your results were. Anyway, I really just hope at the end of the day you walk away from watching this video and you've learned something. And if you did, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel, click that little notification bell, follow me over on Instagram and TikTok at MixingUpTiki. Next week, we're going to be taking a look at the Pina Colada. We're going to be talking about its history, making the classic version, as well as a modern, clarified version. Because the following Monday after that is, well, National Pina Colada Day. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and until next week, as they say in Hawaiian, akole mauna, or bottoms up.